All right. So today's session that we are going to go for, it'll be more or less starting up our project that we are taking forward. And in that same time, we would also like to learn a thing or two about components in more detail. And we try to figure out a way where we can set up a proper project structure, and also, you know, a way we can maintain the code in some particular manner. And we would also try to make our project a bit dynamic by creating some variables. So we'll figure out certain ways in here to maintain our projects all together. So let me create a day 2 folder. And what I'm planning to create, it's a task manager project. All right. So I would right away, first of all, start the process of creating the project. All right. And let's have it running. And let me also put in the topics that we are going to cover today. Now, all the things that we learned in the previous sessions, ES6 and all, they would come into the picture sooner or later. So just be sure that you learn the syntax clearly so that you can understand the code better. And at any point of time, if you feel that you don't understand the syntax, please let me know. So as far as the agenda for today is concerned, I would like to set up a task manager UI, only UI, and that would be focused on components. And once the components are all set and the project structure is all ready, we would like to go for adding a task list as a variable. All right. So in short, populating the task list from the variable, which is called task list or something like that. And this would be a CRUD functionality where we would be able to add, update, delete task in future. And we would also like to add some login related functionality and registration as well. So as I said, this is a small project, but it covers a whole lot of features that you can implement in bigger projects. And at the same time, as I also mentioned yesterday, it will be a good practice if you pick up one module from your existing projects and try to convert it into a React project as we do our task manager UI. So that is something that you can do even over the weekend. So it'll be a great idea. So task manager UI and making the task list dynamic. That means via variables essentially. All right, something like this. So this pretty much is the agenda for today. And I believe everyone is clear with these 2 points, right? All right. So in this particular session altogether, we are not learning anything or React specific, but it is more or less general project specific. So the same concept, if you take it and put it in Angular, apply it in Angular, that would also be as good as what we're doing right now. So it is more or less clearing up the concept on how we set up a UI on any front-end development framework, all right, or library. So again, let's just first discuss what we are going to create. Let me create a document here. And this document is also one that we would be using more and more to understand what eventually we get going with. So what we want to have is a form, and we may call the field title, and we'd also like to have a description. All right. And we'd also like to have a button to go with. And this button would simply help us add the tasks, and that would be populated in a list by the side. Also like to have a cross button just to get the task deleted. Now in this exercise that we are doing, we'd also use Bootstrap for our styling purposes. And we would like to, get some idea on another library, which is called ReactJS. So we'll see what that is. All right, something like this we want to go with. Now we know that good styling would be important. Otherwise, we would not even feel that we are doing something serious, right? So we would definitely like to go for some styling. And once this form and list are created, we'd also like to have a heading for our project, like a header. All right. And we'd also like to have a footer. So header would be something like this. And a footer. All right. Something like this is what we are looking for initially. But then once this whole UI is done, we would like to add more features to this particular project. And at that point, we'd like to replace this title, description, and the list. This whole task manager feature, we'd like to replace it with maybe a login form or a register form. So the title and so the header and footer would remain the same, while the feature in the middle would change. And at that point, we'd also think about applying routing in this particular case. But for now, we'll just stay with this UI. All right. And the functionality should be pretty clear. I believe everyone is clear on this particular UI, right? Okay, very good. Very good. So now my question is, how many components do you think that we should divide this whole thing in? And consider the root component being the app component. We are going for create React app eventually. So please consider that possibility as well. And tell me, how many components do you think this should be divided into? Divyang says 4, Rita says 4, Mikshit says 4. Header, footer, list, and add. Okay, fine. And then the root component, that is the app component as well. So for you, it will be 5 then. All right. What about other participants? Anyone else? Any other ideas? Delete as well. All right. Hmm. Okay. We can divide that action set into a component as well. That is possible. Like delete, edit, and all those things would be divided into components. That is definitely possible. And yeah, so you see here that different people think of it in a different manner. I too think of it in a different manner as well. I mean, depends on the experience that you have with this kinds of projects, component based architectures. So for example, Rita suggested that we should go with header, footer, task list, and the form, right? Which is fine. We can start with that, and then we can move ahead. And if you think that more components can be formed, you can form it on the way. So the process of component generation has to Uh, yeah, I I actually was disconnected for a while. Just a quick confirmation that everyone can hear me. Let me also share my screen. All right. So, so as I said, like this process of component generation, it is more or less, dynamic. But we at least have to start with a set of components. So I would go with some components that I know that they would be there. All right. And if in future we need to add more components, we would add them. So first of all, we would go for the app component, which is the root component of ReactJS. All right. And then there is the header and footer, of course. Right. There is footer as well. And then there will be, now some might think that, okay, we can go with a form and a list, which is fine. But I would always prefer of wrapping the feature in a wrapper component. So basically this whole feature becomes task manager, so that it is easily movable anywhere you want to. You can take it, just one folder and that'll be it. And this whole form would be a different component inside of it. All right. And the list would be a different component altogether. And what I also think is it will be better if we have a component which is task item component, like so. All right. This sort of an approach is what we are looking for. And it could be the possibility that you may think of some other component somewhere down the line, which is totally fine, which is something that would happen and it is fine, basically. All right. So I think everyone is clear with the division of the components that I'm going for. The total components are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 components. Everyone is clear on how I divided this into these 7 components. All right. What about other participants? Okay. So this now has a hierarchy as well. Now this whole process is something that you should do mentally. It's a mental process. But since we are in our first session, we are just going through this process altogether. So this particular set of components has a corresponding hierarchy, in which the first parent component is the app component, of course. All right. Okay. And the app component has uh, 3 child components. So can you tell me what are the 3 children of the app component? Header, footer, and the wrapper. Header, footer, and the content area. Yep, that's correct. So I'll call that content area or the wrapper. I'll call it task manager itself. So header, task manager, footer. All right. Header, task manager, footer. And then the header can have a navigation and all. We would have navigation, but maybe not today, maybe later. So that plus the task manager can have um, 2 children, I guess. 2 children. So what do you think those children would be? Form and list. Very good. Form and list. So we'll call it task form. All right. and task list. All right, something like this. And again, task list can have another child, and that would be task item. And the task item itself would be repeated multiple times. Something like this might happen. All right. So this is the hierarchy that we are looking to form. App would have a header, footer, and a task manager. All right. Task manager would have task form and task list. And task list would have task item. All right. That is the hierarchy. Container and list, and container and list. Yep. So I think this hierarchy that we have formed based on the UI, I believe this is clear to all. All right. Very good. So again, this hierarchy that we have, it has a corresponding folder structure as well. Now I have established one thing in the last session, that whichever component that I create, the component would be a JSX file. So that will be the same. Plus, there is one thing that I learned from Angular is that Angular, literally, like when I was programming in Angular, I realized that the same thing can be applied in React as well. That when you create a component folder, so that you can have the JSX file, the CSS file, the testing related file, and any other sub components that you may have. All right. So that is one thing that I learned by doing Angular programming, which I'm applying in React. So every component would have its own folder, and all the components would be JSX files. All right. So the folder structure might go like this. We know that we have the SRC app folder. The SRC folder itself has, app.js file. Let me just take this somewhere else. Okay, so the SRC folder, it has an app.js. That is your component. That is our folder structure. Let me just show it to you real quick. CD into task manager. My project is compiled. Open it in my editor. And yarn start. For the people who don't have yarn, it'll be npm start. Right, and then there is an SRC folder where there is an app.js file. Right, so SRC has this app.js, and I'd also like to create all the components in a component folder. I updated to the recent Windows version, and it provided me a Microsoft Edge latest browser. It's cool, but I'll open it in Google Chrome. That would be my default browser. Anyways, this should have a components folder, and the components folder would have the components. Like, one would also think that we can go with header, task manager, and footer, but what I always follow as a good approach is whichever components are common between pages, I'll put it in the shared folder. So there will be another shared folder, and shared would have header and footer. And then in the component, there will be task manager. Task manager would have task form and task list. I might have to take it a bit up. And task list would have task item. All right, out of which header would be a component, footer would be a component, task form, task list, task item, task manager, these are components. Even app.js, it's a component. all right? And all these header, footer, task manager, everything would be a folder, all right, in which there will be files that you would be going for. Okay, so this is the folder structure inside the SRC that we want to have. We need to have a components folder of its own and a shared directory where we'd be putting in all the shared components. So this folder structure that I have created, or I'm about to create, this folder structure is clear to all, right? Very good. Very good. So this is what we eventually want to have, and let's get that let's get that done and this UI created. Now we would need two libraries to go with. Let me just list them down. Bootstrap would be there, so you can install Bootstrap by a command, either npm install Bootstrap or yarn add Bootstrap. And there will be another library which is called ReactJS. All right, npm install ReactJS and yarn add ReactJS. I'll tell you what ReactJS is, but one thing that you should know right now is that whenever you want to go for styling, a combination of Bootstrap and ReactJS would work really well for you. So both the libraries have to be used. Only Bootstrap is also enough, but it would create a lot of unreadable code for you. A lot of verbose typing would have to be done. So ReactJS is a supporting library. All right. There is also another library called React Bootstrap, which can be replacement of the ReactJS library, but we'll be using ReactJS only. All right. So these two libraries. So we'll be using them in a while, but let's first get the folder structure created. All right. So the SRC folder may have a components folder, and the components would have a shared directory. And this shared directory would have two folders, header and footer. So we have already established that we'd be creating folders and the components would go inside the folders. All right. So header.jsx and footer.jsx. All right. And inside the components, we'd create one more component, that is task manager. And the file that we'll be having is task manager.jsx, like so. All right, header, footer, task manager. Three components at different places. And this is for good, actually. This is the same project structure that you can follow in your projects as well. However, there is a possibility you would find better folder structures, all right, or even inferior folder structures. React or Create React App doesn't actually have any opinion on what folder structure you may have. Shubham, there is no CLI command to create a component, so we'd have to go manually with Create React App. There are other tool chains that are Gatsby.js. Gatsby.js has CLI commands as well, but not Create React App. All right, Shubham. All right, so we would be creating all the components as functional components right now, but then you would find that later down the line, when we find out the importance of class components, we would shift some components from being functional to being class components. But for now, we'll just go for functional components only. All right. As of now, we just know the syntax and we don't know the use case scenario on when to use class and when to use function. That's also the other reason. So we would go for creating a component. So it'll be like import React from React. And I'd be using the fat arrow syntax right away. So basically const header, and it would always be a good idea to pass in or take in props. Nevertheless, like regardless of the fact that you're passing in props or not, it is always a good practice to take in props. If you don't pass props, it'll just be an empty object, doesn't harm anything. So we'll just keep it there. And I'll go for a paragraph saying header works. And I would export header. All right. And I would go for same thing for the footer and the task manager. All right. So header, footer, and task manager, 3 components, functional components. The other day or yesterday, I created a function that is a JavaScript ES5 function, but now I'm going for a fat arrow. All right. This is what I follow as a practice, just making it lightweight. And I believe everyone gets the 3 components that I created right now. Everyone is clear on the syntax? Very good. Okay. So first I'll go into the app component. And also I would just take off anything that is not necessary for me to begin with. So first of all, I do not need the app.css at all. So in the app component, you can see that there is an app.css imported. I'll delete it. I don't need the logo. I'll delete it because in here, it'll simply be a header. Oh, not even a header actually. It'll simply be a div with the class name container. And container, it's a class name which is something which is specified in Bootstrap. And one other thing that you might have noticed is that instead of class, we are using class name. And that is for the fact that this one, it's not HTML, it is JSX, which means it is JavaScript. So probably the reason of not using class as a property is that class is a keyword in JavaScript. Similarly, there is one for keyword in JavaScript as well. That would change. All right, so class becomes class name, and later on for will become something called HTML for the label. All right, so this is the only difference that you need to know between JSX and HTML. Other things are almost the same. All right, so class name container, this would have some rows in it. So we would like to, get the rows created. But first, let me just delete the logo and the CSS file. We don't need them. And if we talk about index.js, we're not going to create a progressive web app. So we would get rid of the service worker. And there is something called React strict mode, which follows rigidly some rules, but we don't want the strict mode right now. We want it as it was earlier. So I'll just get rid of the strict mode. Maybe we can discuss the strict mode later. So service worker goes, index.css stays, all right? And the only thing is that the CSS inside the index.css would go. So the file itself would stay. Maybe we may need it for some styling later. All right. So I may get rid of the service worker.js as well. We don't need it. So I'll get rid of that. All right. So now the structure becomes fairly simple, and index.js also becomes fairly simple to us now. And there will be something more coming in later down inside the index.js as well. As of now, we are just focusing in the app.js. So let me import header from components, shared header.jsx. Same goes for footer. All right. And same goes for task manager as well. So it will be task manager, and that will be right away inside the components folder. All right. So 3 components imported, and we'll be putting it into the 3 rows. And Bootstrap definitely has a class called row. So we'll put it in. So div, there'll be a class name row, and inside of which there'll be 1 column each. So class name call. All right. I believe everyone is familiar with that Bootstrap row column structure, right? Everyone? So header, task manager, very good. And the footer. All right, something like this. And you can see header works, task manager works, footer works. Bootstrap not implemented yet. All right, so we would have to implement Bootstrap altogether. Okay, so I think this app component is pretty clear to everyone, right? Nice. So the good thing about component is once you are done with one of the components, you can just forget about it and close it down and start working on the other components. All right, so we'll do exactly the same. We'll close down the app.js and maybe I'll start working with the header. So what I want in a header is I'd like to have a React fragment, one that we used yesterday, with an h1 task manager and an HR tag. So basically that'll be a heading and you know, a horizontal ruler. And we would like to now get the styling in. And there are two ways where we can go for the styling. One is that we can simply take the CDN from the Bootstrap and put it inside the head portion of our index.html file. This is the easier way out. So if I go for getbootstrap.com, the official website, and yeah, you can definitely go for it by npm install. So that is there. But if I just go for the CDN, I can copy it and paste it in the head portion. And as soon as I do it, you'd see that now you get a container kind of a structure, and also you get the fonts changed. Earlier they were serif fonts, now they are sans serif, which means Bootstrap is kicking in. So this is one approach that we can always go for. And it's not a bad approach, it is all fine. But at times what may happen is that your Bootstrap would be basically something that would be different, or your project would be different, you know. It may get certain things from the server, uh, which is which is probably an intranet but not an internet kind of a thing. So that is something that may happen. All right, and at that point the external style sheet would really be a problem, because if your application is closed, then the external style sheets actually do not get accessed. And at that point, we'd have to get something internal. We'll have to download Bootstrap in our project, and then we'd have to use it. All right. So if that is the case, we may not go for this kind of a CSS. All right. So we may delete it and we'd go for the other way around. But again, this way of doing it, it's perfectly valid, not an issue at all. CDN approaches are always valid. All right. So what I will do is I would go ahead and install Bootstrap in my project. You can go with npm install Bootstrap, but my project is already associated with Yarn. So I'd go with Yarn add Bootstrap. Let's wait for this to get installed. Okay. And if you want to check where did that get installed, it would be inside our node modules folder. Angular developers would already know it. And the package.json would also be updated. Like Bootstrap is updated as a dependency inside the package.json file. So this, plus if I go into my node modules folder, and if I scroll down a bit, you'd see that there are a lot of dependencies, Babel and all those things. Somewhere down, you'd also find React and React DOM as well. But Bootstrap is the one that we're looking for. So Bootstrap dist CSS, and the file that we're going for is bootstrap.min.css. All right. So this is basically what it is. So if I want to include this file, I'd be including it in the main file, that is the index.js altogether. So let's see how do we include it. Let me just minimize this. And if I go to index.js, right above the index.css, I can go for import and see src index.js, like index.js is inside the src folder, while Bootstrap is above one level inside the node modules folder. So what do you think should I do in here? What should I start with if I want to go above one level? Dot slash is the current level only, Rita. Dot slash means current level. What means one level above? Yep, dot slash, right? So yes, we can do this dot slash, and you can see that it already gives you the suggestions like node modules and then Bootstrap. This can be done, all right? But when we go for a Node.js project, the whole module system is set in such a way that you don't have to necessarily go to the node modules folder, but you can assume that node modules folder is everywhere, all right? So every file is in the scope of the node modules folder, and we can start with the library directly. So it will be simply bootstrap dist css bootstrap.min.css, all right? And once I do that, you'd see that Bootstrap would come into the picture again, all right? And the same thing is with the same thing is there for the React and React DOM libraries as well. We are not specifying node modules here because it's a Node.js project. That is the way it is set up, all right? So I believe everyone gets this import that I have done inside the index.js, right? Very good. So that out of the way, we would now like to go for more components. We have the header. Maybe we can also do something to the footer. All right, and this footer would be something like HR and a small tag, small/small, and copyright, elegant. All right, and that would be our footer, right? So the header and footer, they're basically done, and we would now like to move on to the next component, that is the task manager. But before that is done, we would like to also consider one fact. You see that inside the app.js, there is this div class name container, div class name row, div class name call, and so on and so forth. When you create more hierarchies, the whole verbose nature of this specifying of class name would really become non-readable. And at that point, it would be always better if you have something that would make your syntax cleaner than what this is. And for that, we have something called ReactStrap. And basically ReactStrap, it's a set of components which are Bootstrap 4 components, and they're really clean as far as the syntax is concerned. For example, if I want to create a button, right? So if a primary button, we would just have to import button from ReactStrap and just go with button primary or something like this, you know. And this would create a button tag, adding a class name, btn primary, and all those HTML things would be created automatically. All right. So that is basically what it is. So what we are after this time around is this row column structure. I would keep it the same in the app.js, but I would like to go for the layout inside the task manager components. I'll close down the app.js, but I'd like to do some ReactStrap in the task manager. So if you see the whole structure, we are importing container, row, call, and then the container and row and call. This would create divs automatically. So these are the components that we are looking for, and makes your code more readable. So we would go with ReactStrap in this particular session. And let me first install ReactStrap in here. Also, I'll give you the reference so that in case you want to create more components, better looking ones, you can just go with the ReactStrap library, right? Now let's install ReactStrap in here. And this is true for any front-end CSS framework. Like for example, there's something called Material UI. Material UI also goes with the same logic. Basically, there's a CSS file, and then there is HTML elements that we need to go for. And then there is semantic UI, same way, semantic UI CSS, and then a semantic UI component set, and similarly Bootstrap as well. So this is the approach that React uses more or less every time. So let's wait for this React Strap to get installed. All right, and we'll start with the task manager. Now, if you check out our UI, inside this task manager itself, we need two columns side by side. So we'd have one row and two columns beside each other. Rest will be handled by Bootstrap itself. So let's do that. Plus, in those two columns, we need two components. So we'll create those components as well first. All right. So I would go for the task form component inside task manager. All right, which would be task form.jsx. And also we'd go for task list. And this would be task list.jsx. All right, both of them would be functional components, but later you would see that task form would be converted to a class component for a reason. As of now, we'll just make it as a functional component. All right, task form works and task list works. Okay, and we would now like to include both of them inside our task manager component. So task form and task list. And here we may have, like, we need to have that row column structure, right? So we would import row and column from React Strap. And let me also open our project on the side. So import row and col from React Strap. And we'd go with one row and two columns in it. Task form task list. And what I can expect here is that I should be able to get the task form and the task list going. Yep, side by side. This whole thing is managed by Bootstrap itself. Like if I keep two columns, it will evenly distribute those two columns into the whole 12 column grid. So that is Bootstrap 4. It's a cool feature that way. We don't have to specify what width you want if you want equal number of divisions. All right, so I believe the task manager component that I created, it is clear to you, right? Good. So the task manager being done, and again, we can focus solely on specific components only. So I'd start with the task form component. This is also like, it's just that too much of code is there in there, but form is pretty simple. So there is, in React Strap, there is a form that is available, and it is basically form group, label, input, and button, and so on and so forth. That is something that I'll be importing, and I'll be using them, right? And I know for a fact that there is a specific set of syntax that we should use, but you would have to practice if you are going to go for React Strap. All right, so what I'll do is, let me just make it a bit bigger. So import form group, input, label, and button. I think these are the ones that we need to create a form at this point from ReactJS. And then I go for returning this form altogether. And Parth has a question: can I write HTML in a separate file? Well, I think that question comes in by the approach that Angular has, where HTML is separate. In React, it is not possible because HTML, it's not HTML, it is JSX, right? First thing. So JSX in a separate file would only be possible if you create a component out of it. So people manage it in a way where the form template, it's also a component that returns as the whole form, and then they include it in the main task form component. So that way you can manage. Otherwise, there's no concept of having an .html file sort of a thing in React, because simply it is not HTML. That's the only thing. All right, so you can separate it, provided the fact that it is a component that you can include and use. I think that clears it out. Good. So form/form, and we'd have a form group. The form group basically would have a label, title, all right, and we'd have a for attribute. Now label has this attribute called for, but then again, for is something which is a keyword in JavaScript, and hence it'll become HTML for title. So we saw class name is what we use in place of class, and HTML4 is what we use in place of for. Bootstrap allows you to, this ReactJS allows you to use for though, rather than HTML4, but that's a different story. We'll just stick to HTML4 for now. And input would have an ID, title. So it's the 4 ID combination that we are working on. And there'll be a form group for text area or description, you may say. Input type would be text area, and ID would be description. Button would be there. We'll call it add. We may call it a primary button. Color primary, something like this. All right, and that would be a primary button. And just see what happens in here. For example, if I go with input type text area, all right, and if I do an inspect element here, you'd see that the ReactJS library itself creates for us a text area with the class form control. So it creates a Bootstrap element for us. All right, and Palak, as I said, like if I also do an inspect element for the button, you'd see that the button color primary eventually gives us an HTML button class btn primary. So it is to avoid that sort of verbosity that we are using ReactJS. Otherwise, we can go for button as well, but eventually a lot of classes would be verbose. So we are using ReactJS. ReactJS does that for us. All right, Palak? Okay. I would like to have maybe 5 rows in here in the text area that we have. Right, it'll look like this. And this is the form that we have created. Everyone is clear on the form creation that we have, right? So there's a question from Shubham that we can put all the controls under one form group. Why are we adding multiple? Well, the form group way of doing it is it's a Bootstrap specification. In Bootstrap, a set of label and input, they are under one form group. So that this form group is different from the Angular's form group. All right, I think you're referring it back to Angular itself. So this is a different form group. This is a Bootstrap related form group, which is basically a group of label and the input. and Angular's form group is different altogether. All right. Can we add custom CSS name on button? Yeah, we can have a class name, like class name is equal to something, and then you already have your index.css included, so you can add that particular class inside the index.css. That is always possible. So if I, for example, do a button class name test, all right, and if I go for an inspect element, you would see that the test class is already added. So this is still possible. All right. Okay, now we go for the task list, and we know that we also need a task item component. So inside the task list, I'll create another folder. Task item.jsx, and this would be also, to start with, a functional component would be an ideal one. All right, and we would like to import it inside the task list, and also the way I want it to be formatted, it's like a list group, which is this way. And we also need a button at the end, as a close button or a delete button. So I would import a list group in here. So task list would have list group, all right, and the task item would have this particular list group item component imported. That is just because the way it should be arranged. All right, so I would import, and let me also on the side open the output. I would import list group from ReactJS here, and this would be list group, and also I would import task list, and inside the task list I would have list group item. Oh, list group item, no, import task list from, why am I importing task list? Should be task item, right? From task item slash task item.jsx, and I would manually, first of all, repeat the task items. Let's just repeat it this way. We would definitely like to have a loop, but looping, it's a bit different in React, so we'll restrain us using a loop right now. We'll first get the UI done. So this is the task list component that we have, and I believe everyone is clear on why I used list group here only. I didn't use list group item in here. That I'll be using it in task item. So please let me know that this is clear to all. Okay, so I'll close the task list down, go into the task item. Task item needs list group item plus button from ReactJS, and we'd have list group item, maybe write some dummy text for now, and a button. Actually, there is a possibility where we can use a property called close that will actually create a close button for you. That is again something provided by ReactJS. So you can see that there is a close button created here, which is aligned right at the, floated right or something like that. And you have some dummy text specified in here. We'd like to make it dynamic, but this is our UI that we want to create. All right, so everyone is clear on this whole UI creation process that we had? Please confirm once. Very good. I'd like to have a confirmation from all. So all the participants who have not confirmed, please do confirm. We will need dynamic name of the item. Yes, that's correct, Palak. We would need dynamic name of the item. That would come from a variable. All right. So this being done, now we would like to get some looping or variable creation done in this particular case. And we'd come back to our diagram. So what we are talking of is just the task manager component and related components here. So let me just copy them. I'll paste them here. All right. So this particular set of components is what we are talking about. So now we'll first have to decide that which component out of all these, which of the component is the one that requires the task variable. All right. If I want to, for example, loop through some variable, I'd have to declare a variable first somewhere. So which component do you think should have the variable? Which represents the list of tasks, essentially. The variable should contain all the tasks. What component should I declare it in? All right, Rita says task list. Any other opinions, or task list is fine? Palak says task item. All right, so there's basically a debate between what a task list, whether task list would require it or task item. Jignesh says task manager, and yes, that would be eventually it. But right now, all we need to do is we need to just run a loop. And for that, I would select task list to start with. Eventually, we'd go for the task manager, but we'd first go with the task list component. And there would be a reason why we go for the task manager. That will be a different story. So Palak also mentioned that we can go for task item, but we would not, because task item is something that represents one task altogether, and what we want is to represent all the tasks, and that is the task list representation. All right, I believe that is clear, Palak. Why not task item and why task list? All right, so that is what we are going to do. I'll just copy this and I'll paste it in here, and this would be multiple tasks, right? So what is the data type of this variable that you may look for? What type of a variable should be? All right, array, Mixit and Kishan are correct. Array, I'd go with an array. So it basically would be a task array. All right, which is fine. That is what we want. And what we also want is we want to loop through the array, and then we want to send one task at a time to each task item component, right? One task at a time to each task item via each iteration. Okay, so this is what we are trying to create. Diagrammatically, I think everyone should be clear on what I want to exactly create, right? Okay, very good. There will be a looping that would be done in an array, and we'd be using a function called array.map to do that. But anyways, let's create our array first, and let's go into the task list component to do that. And I'd be creating a tasks array. I'm creating it as a const, which is solely because of the reason that I want my program to be predictable. And unless it is absolutely necessary, I would not create a let variable. All right, I would always create const unless let is absolutely necessary. At this point, I think const would be fine. All right, so we'd go for the task array. Now, provided the fact that we have this form with title and description, and then there will be other properties as well for representation of a task, what should be the data type of the variables inside the array? So basically, this is an array of what data type? Anyone? What do you think would represent an entire task? We need a task model, right? We need a task model. That's absolutely correct. Like the data type would be an object. First of all, it would be an array of objects. All right, but we would be creating objects through a class, so with the new keyword and all right. So I believe everyone, yep, we need to create an object of a class. So I believe everyone is with me on this. We need to create a class first, and of that particular class that represents a task, we'd be creating objects, right, everyone? Very good. And I would create a new folder in src. I'll call it models. This would have different entities. Like right now we are just talking about the task entity, so this would just have a task.js right now, but then user.js, anything.js would be there. So I would just go for class task. And remember, this is not a component or anything like that. It is just a plain old class. It'll have certain properties. We don't even need to declare properties because JavaScript is loosely typed. We can right away go for a constructor and we can create properties on the fly. So constructor would have an ID, title, description. I may like to have description to be blank by default. All right, some default value, and maybe completed to be false by default, and there'll be a date which will be new date by default. So for the properties that are obvious, I'm just putting in some default values. Like completed, any task would not be completed by default, so it'll be false, and the date would be the current date. So that's what I'm doing. And I would go for this dot id is equal to id, this dot title is equal to title, this dot description is equal to description, this dot completed is equal to completed, this dot date is equal to date. All right, so whatever you don't pass, you'd have the default values. I have not given default values for id and title, so they would be necessary to be passed in, so that is there. And at the end I would be exporting the task class, and then we'd be creating an object. So I would like to make sure that everyone gets the whole class that I've created, and also specifically why didn't I declare the properties. The reason for that, I mean, this because JavaScript is dynamically typed. So everyone gets this? Right? Everyone else, please confirm. All right. So again, right now we would just use this class to create different objects, but later it may also help us in mapping your data that is coming in from the API. So that data mapping is something which is very important. That's why we have created a class to start with, but as of now, only objects. All right, so in here, I would go with something like this. I would import task from models task, like so. Because it is a task.js file, I'm not specifying the extension. And I'd go with new task. ID would be 1. Learn ReactJS. Then there will be some other tasks as well. Learn components. Learn props. Just create 5 tasks would be fine, and learn Redux. All right, 5 tasks created, and we don't loop through them right now, and hence there's no difference in the output whatsoever. Because there are 6 task items in here, you're getting 6 task items displayed in the UI. No difference in the output, but this variable is created. Now we would like to loop through this variable, and for that looping through of the variable, we would be using one ES5 feature, and that will be of an array. Array has certain methods and properties that we would learn. Like one is map, of course, that is the one that we'll be using. There is a for each for an array, and then there is a length property that we may be also using. We also saw that the new date is also a feature that came in from ES5 directly. It was available all the way, right? So we'd go for the map function or the map method of an array to get that looping done. All right. So first of all, let me know that who is aware of the array.map method in JavaScript. Anyone? If you're not aware, just say 0 so that I know. Okay. Let's learn the map method first. And for that, I would also like to take a case of for each as well. And let me put it in a separate file. JavaScript arrays. And let me open it up in my editor. So what we have here is a set of arrays that would, or a set of methods that would allow you to loop through the arrays. All right. So array methods.js would be one file, and I'd try to run it through Node.js. Sahil has a question: binding with data type, array.bind with the data type defined. Yeah, that probably I defined the data type not so that I can bind it with the array, but more or less to have the data mapped, when you go for an API call. So as of now, I would not go for bind itself. All right, but later down we may go for that particular method as well. All right, Sahil. Okay, so in here, let's say if I create a marks array, right? Let me create it in the 10th position, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. And if I go for something like marks.forEach, for each would have a callback function internally as an argument, and that callback function would basically loop through all the array elements, and at one iteration it will have one element as an argument. So if I, for example, if I go for a console log m, all right, and if I run this, you'd see that the for each basically loops through the whole set of array that is there. So in order to learn map, it is better that we learn for each first. And if I maybe try and see what for each returns, let's say const result is equal to marks.forEach. If I do this, and if I try to have a console log, the result is, and displaying the result. Can you tell me what could the result be in this particular case? If anyone has done JavaScript in much detail, they would be aware of it. Otherwise, it's fine. I mean, okay. So result in a sense, like output definitely would be it, but what I'm talking about is the result variable. What would it be storing in it? Let's see. Sahil says object. Let's see what it is. The result is undefined. Now, how many of you are aware that undefined is actually a data type in JavaScript? Okay. All right. So undefined, exactly, it's actually a data type. All right. So whenever a function that you use, whenever it doesn't return anything, then you get undefined. All right. And let's say this undefined way of going for it, it was always there in JavaScript. And even if I go into my browser, and if I just try to check a type of some variable like type of X, where I have not declared X, right, it will give us undefined. Any variable that is not declared is undefined. Any function that doesn't return anything and you try to fetch the return value of it, it gives you undefined. So first of all, everyone should confirm that they now know that undefined is actually a data type in JavaScript. All right. And for each, it is returning us undefined. The result is undefined here. And let me just get rid of the console log for a while, maybe comment it out. The result is undefined because for each doesn't return us anything, as simple as that. But now, if I change this for each to map, you'd have a different type of a result. All right. If I change it to map instead of for each, you can see that now it doesn't return us nothing. It returns us an array, but inside that array, there's nothing. I mean, there are elements, 5 elements, the same number of elements that Mark's array has, but all of them are undefined. And that is because we have not returned anything inside this function, all right, inside this maps callback function. Say, for example, if I return hello world inside of it, all right, and if I rerun the program, you'd see that I'll get the result as hello world array. Every iteration would return hello world, and the resultant array would be a set of hello world statements. So say, for example, if I go for something like return M and then I print the result, what do you think the output should be in this particular case? Very good, Palak. Palak says that it'll be the same array, Akshay as well. So if I rerun it, you can see that it returns as the same array. Obviously, then I can do anything with it. Like I can go for a marks plus 1, which would basically give you, 1 incremented. And that would not affect the marks array at all, all right? So the marks array, the initial array would remain the same. It'll not do anything to the initial, source array. It'll just return you a new array, all right? So this is what map is. And what I want, essentially, using this map as a looping mechanism, is that I'm to return something like this, returning like a task item or something like that. I don't want to return the elements itself, but I want to return a set of task items. So that kind of a thing is what I want as a result. All right. I would not be able to use JSX in here because it is JavaScript and not React. But essentially, this is the idea of using the map method and hence looping through the items that I have. All right. So I believe everyone understands the map method along with for each, of course, and what it returns, and also what I'm going to use it as. Yes, everyone? Very good. So let me close this down and let me open up my code. Here, I can do this like const task list is equal to, or maybe may say task items is equal to tasks.map, and this would have a callback. This would give me one task, so I'll call it task. You can call this variable anything, but since it's representing one task, I'll be calling it task itself. And for now, I'll just return task item. All right. And if I, for example, if I do a console log task items, let me show you the console. It would give me an array of 5 elements on the task list JSX line number 20, which is this one. All right. And the array would be React elements array. All of them would be React elements. So a good way to go for as far as display is concerned is that we can do something like this. You can get rid of the task items here and just go for task items. You can interpolate those task items all together. All right. And now you can see that 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 tasks are displayed. The title is not yet dynamic. We are yet to send some data to the task item altogether, but the 5 tasks are displayed in here. And we can make it even shorter by getting rid of the return statement. If we know that the fat arrow function can act in a very compact manner, it will still be the same as an output. Also, further, we can just take this whole thing and put it here and get rid of the new variable itself. No unnecessary variable created. We can directly go for task.map. All right. So this would again give you the same number of elements. So say, for example, if I add one, let's say 6 and learn saga, you'd see that there is a 6th element added. And the titles are still static. There's nothing that we did in the task item. All right. So this whole looping that we did with the map function of the array, this is clear to all, right? Okay, what about other participants? Good. So now there is one problem that we'd have to deal with. And this problem would introduce you to the concept of virtual DOM in React. And it is always said that React is faster than normal JavaScript or jQuery. And the reason is this. First of all, let me just do an inspect element. Should give you an error, or not an error, but a warning. The warning is each child in a list should have a unique key property. Whenever we try to iterate and display a list of an iterable, in this case, the task array, the child element should first of all have a unique key property. So we'll first do that. We'll first do whatever it says just to get the warning off. So we'll have a key, and the key's value would be something unique. So what do you think would be unique to put in inside this particular value? Remember, task is the object that we are getting. Very good, Jignesh. Jignesh says task.id. I believe everyone would agree, task.id. Yes, everyone? Very good. And you see here that the warning is gone. Now, why did it give us that warning? And what did this key do, actually? So first of all, we need to know that ReactJS, it's something that works on top of the virtual DOM, and the real DOM modification is done by ReactJS. So if you recall the first lecture that we had like yesterday, when I said that document.getElement by ID, it is the one and only place where we'll be accessing the document object itself from the browser. Otherwise, we would not be doing it. And if we don't access the document object, then who does? The answer is ReactJS does the document object access, and it modifies the document. All we need to do is we need to modify the ReactJS component only. We don't need to do anything as a modification in the document. Now, when we do that modification, React needs to know which component is which one, because the task item is iterated and it has the same template. React itself doesn't know, or doesn't basically differentiate between one or the other template, because they're like the same templates. They're the same elements altogether. So in order to identify them uniquely, so that if React wants to get rid of one item when we go for the delete method, or if React wants to sort them or reorder them, or maybe drag and drop kind of a thing, so React has to know the uniqueness of each and every item, and it has to maintain that. That's why key property is necessary for React. We would never be able to access the key property as well. This is only for React. So if you go into the task item, try and do props.key would not be possible at all. All right. So it is something that React needs, and it is for React, and so that React can manipulate the real DOM based on the virtual DOM. More on virtual DOM and real DOM later tomorrow when we go for something called state of a component. But this fairly is an introduction to what a virtual DOM and real DOM combination would be. All right. So the task item is done. We'd also like to pass the whole task itself. So I can do something like task is equal to task. All right. So this is the new property that I'm setting in the task item, and this is the value, and the value is basically one task per iteration. All right. So this is my task list component as a whole, with the key property inside the iterable, and also an additional property that we want to access and display the title with. All right. So I believe everyone is clear on this. All right. Very good. And inside the task item, now things become really simple. So if I go into the task item, and because we are passing the property, if I do a console log of props, you'd see in the console that you get the properties, and the object has this particular property called task, and each task has this task item property. There is a key property available as well, like a get key function and all, but that is not something that we are going to use. We just are concerned with the task property. So I can, let's say if I go with props.task, you'd get the whole object, and of which title is something that interests us for now. So what I can do is props.task.title. All right. And that gives us all the titles displayed dynamically. We can make it even further shorter, and we'll be using this way of accessing the properties. Const task is equal to props. This is the object destructuring syntax, always helpful as a syntax. So we'd always form a habit of going for this kind of a syntax. All right, we are extracting tasks from the props, and then we are going for task.title. That would be better. All right. So this diagram that we went for, where we had the task array declared in the task list, and then we are sending it down to the task item. This is what we have implemented as far as the code is concerned. And I believe everyone is clear with it. Yes? Very good. I'd like to have a confirmation from all. Okay. Very good. Great. So why there are braces around the task constant? So Jaspreet, this syntax is the object destructuring syntax. So basically it is like const task is equal to props.task, right? So if I want to do this, I can do this. Or if I want to do a destructuring, which is an ideal way of getting this whole thing done, so that if there is multiple properties, we can get that accommodated in one line only. So we are going for the destructuring syntax rather than the line number 6. All right. Okay. So yes, this is done. Of course, eventually we would like to make this form add a task to this particular list of tasks. That is something that we want to do. But if we want to do that, there are certain things that we need to get around first. Form would not be done today, by the way. Form would be done tomorrow, where we'd also go through something called state of a component. But we need to understand one thing in here. There is a task form, there is a task list, two different components altogether. All right. And in order for the task form to do anything to the task array, it should be able to be connected to the task list in some manner. So there's no direct connection between task form and task list, but there is one way where both of these are connected. Can anyone point out how are the task form and task list connected to each other? right? Jignesh Patel says parent. Akshay also says task manager. So basically task manager is the is the parent component of both task form and task list. So that is something that can do the trick, where if for example task form is somehow capable of passing data to the task manager, and then task manager somehow does something to the task list, that sort of a connection can be maintained. That is for sure. However, the problems are actually multifold. Like task list, if we speak of programmatically, if we check out the task list component, task list is a function, and task, it's a local variable to the function. Now whenever it's a local variable inside of a function, there is no possibility that any other function would be able to do anything to this particular local variable inside the function, right? And what we are expecting is that the task form passes on the message to the task manager, and then the task manager modifies this task array. But the task manager would not be able to do that because it is inside the scope of this particular function, programmatically speaking. So in order for the task manager to modify this array should be there inside the task manager, and then maybe you can pass on one particular the whole array, you can pass it on to the task list, like so. If this is the possibility, then if the task form instructs the task manager to add something, the task manager could push an element to this particular array, right? Otherwise, if it is in the task list, task manager would not be able to do anything. All right. So first of all, I would like you to confirm that you understand why am I trying to move the task array to the parent component rather than just keeping it in the task list. All right. Conceptually very important. So I would like to understand it from all, that you get what I'm trying to convey. Can we do this through a task model, which is used in task form and task item? So Rita, technically, like theoretically, yes, we can, but technically we can't, because React doesn't. So say for example, if you want the model to be created, the model should be a global object, and it should be a singleton global object kind of a thing. All right. So theoretically model can be used, but React programming doesn't actually use the model in that particular manner where it will be a global singleton. So the mechanism that you're specifying is something which would involve Redux as well. And at that point, the model combined with Redux would be our model layer of our MVC. All right. And other participants, please let me know that you understand why did I take the task array out of the task list to the parent component. There are some participants who have already reverted. I'd like to know from all. Good. So once this structure is established, then if the task form passes some message to the task manager can modify the array, because the array is in task manager's scope. All right. So that is what we will be achieving today, but then the task form functionality will be going for it tomorrow. So let me just do this really quickly, and then we would conclude the session. All right. So what I want basically is, let me just open up the task manager component. All right. And inside the task manager, I need tasks. All right. And these tasks would be passed into the task list. Let's say tasks is tasks. Now, I always like to keep the property and the value the same identifier. That really makes it simple for me to understand, but you can have them as different identifiers. It's not necessary that this and this have to be the same, not necessary at all. All right. So in the task manager we have this, and I would take the whole set of tasks from here. Let me just copy this and make it a blank array in the task list. And as soon as I get the blank array, you'd see that you not have anything at all in here. You can get rid of the task model as well. All right. And we can put the list of tasks inside the task manager. But then task is not defined, so I'd have to import task model in here. All right. So what I'm doing is I'm going for declaring the tasks inside the task manager. I'm passing it on as a property called tasks inside task list. And in the task list, I'm not taking in the props right now. I'm just having it as a blank array. First, I would just make sure that I go for one conditional render, that if tasks.length is 0, then it should return something else. What do you think should it return if the task length is 0? Anyone? Right. Something like no records found, or a message that there is nothing to show. All right. That's right, Jignesh Patel. So there is an alert component. I can go with an alert, no tasks to show. All right. And it will display like this. You can have different color if you want to, but this is what it is. And if there are tasks, say for example, we are having it in props and I would be doing destructuring. So I'll go for props. And once there are tasks available, you'd get all the tasks in here. So once again, what am I doing here is I'm declaring all the tasks inside the task manager so that later the task manager can do some modifications to it, passing it inside the task list as a property, destructuring the tasks from the props, and also doing a conditional render here. That is also there. And in the task item, I'm passing one task at a time with the tasks.map function. And in the task item, taking in the props again, destructuring, and displaying the title of the task. All right, you can display any other data if you want to. But this is basically what we have accomplished today as far as making tasks dynamic. So the whole flow that we have accomplished, plus the usage of Bootstrap and ReactJS together, I believe all of it is clear to you. Very good. Very good, guys. So this is almost a similar approach that you take for any project, a bigger project with a bigger hierarchy. But eventually this approach would fail and we would realize that we need Redux in order to go forward with. All right. But maybe Redux might not come from for one session. Like next time we're meeting on Monday, right? So on Monday we'll not do Redux, but on the Wednesday we'll be going for the Redux session as well. All right. Here, alert is a component of Bootstrap or ReactJS. So you see that I'm importing alert from ReactJS altogether, Shubham. So I'll be importing everything from ReactJS only. What this would do is, let's say if I do an inspect element, for example, if I have maybe tasks is equal to a blank array, and this shows us an alert. And if I do an inspect element, you see that internally it creates as div class alert, alert success, fade show. All these classes are Bootstrap classes that ReactJS uses. Alert, however, it's a ReactJS element. So I'll be going for all the elements from ReactJS only. Those elements would be using Bootstrap classes, and hence the styling is also necessary. That style that we included in index, that is also necessary. All right. So I believe that is clear to you. Cool. I'll get rid of this and uncomment stuff, give you the task list. All right. So we are open for Q&A. If you have any questions, please let me know or say 0 so that I can conclude the session. Okay. All right. Very good. So as always, I'd be providing you the code. I'd also be committing this to GitHub. All right. The task manager project itself, and I'll be keeping on committing it so that you have that project from the GitHub, and I'd provide you the code and notes and everything. So that will be also there, and the video as well. Hopefully you got the video from yesterday, and we'll be getting the video from today as well. I would like you to go through it and repeat whatever we have done. Maybe try to implement this in some other project as well. All right. So here we call it a day, and the next day we meet would be Monday in the next week. All right. Same time. Up till then, have a nice weekend and take care. Bye-bye.